We've been given many names. Ghostrunners.
Run while you go!
Human-like killing machines.
I kept them in line.
It's time to wake up.
After playing through Ghostrunner 1 to remind myself of how good it felt and to make my video retrospective, it seemed fitting that I should return to its sequel for the first time since playing it on release, which in my mind was much maligned and nowhere near the level of the first. I had a preconceived bias for this game and video before I even loaded it up again, in that it's fine, but it's nowhere near as good as the first in any way, and you should just stick to playing that one. I'll be the first to admit something that I realised early doors. After playing for about 2 minutes, I realised I was very wrong about this game. There are issues with it, and the complaints I had still exist. However, I was blinded, because the positives of this out game slap any negatives to the side in a way only a free-running Cyber Ninja can. Let's take a look at Ghostrunner 2 in more depth, and why I was right in some ways, but very wrong in others. Going straight from the first game into playing this one may have helped slightly, but I will freely admit I was pleasantly surprised playing this game again. In my head, it didn't feel as fast or flow as well as the first when I first played it, and while that's true in some sections, for the most part Ghostrunner 2 feels like a worthy sequel, albeit with some things that stop it being as impactful as the first game in my opinion. I think where the game excels is the small improvements and adjustments from the first game. Its stumbling blocks are the new things it tried that don't quite hit as they should. One of those being the game's story and its writing.
Who is he again?
Armand? A major hard-ass. Judging by the fact he single-handedly butchered all the Hammerstop fighters to take control.
Sure, the more the merrier.
You don't feel the need?
Nah, man, she's a scientist.
That's it, really.
I've seen Zoe access a cyber-like environment from a regular computer.
And I've seen people licking ice cream through a window pane.
Just peachy.
Now I'll try not to be hyperbolic, because Ghostrunner 1 has a fine story and decent writing. It's nothing groundbreaking or revolutionary, but it never needed to be, but it had snappy dialogue, decent themes, and wasn't like forced upon you. It was sort of molded into the gameplay in a really good way. It was engaging because of how it was delivered and its decent quality of writing. Ghostrunner 2 for me, despite trying to do more with its story and its writing, ultimately does less. It's nowhere near as interesting from the immediate outset as the first one, and it's quite sluggish in its delivery in the way it does it. Even for someone coming straight from the first game, I was immediately lost in the other stages about what was going on and who everyone was. You go from having 3 characters in the first, not including the player, to at least 6 or 7 here.
Jack, good job out there.
I have questions. It was unpleasant.
Threat neutralized?
Why didn't you just say so? You heard the man, Kevin. We're going on an adventure.
Take off your shackles, number.
I'll be fine if he's back.
For me, it just doesn't click. It's almost trying to do too much and not enough in the same instance. What doesn't help is the game's insistence on the new mini-hub between levels as a method for delivering story and background on characters.
Later.
In between most missions when you're in here, you're able to speak to characters, to get dialogue and motivations in between most of the missions. The problem with this delivery is in the way it slows the game down. Whereas the first was go from beginning to end, this hub just serves to slow the pace down in an artificial way for me. Ghostrunner is at its benchmark best when it's in full flow, not when I'm walking around being talked at by characters. To do it this way you have to nail it. RPGs get the benefit of having a really long game to flesh out their characters. Think Mass Effect for example. This game doesn't have that amount of time, so it feels like a tick box exercise. I've finished the level, so now let's go talk to XYZ because I can, not because I necessarily want to. Some will find it functional, but for me it felt like a step down from the simple delivery style of the first game. But with so many new characters added, I do suppose it was a necessary evil, just not one that worked in my particular
Same
opinion.
as you were during your 20 years retirement episode.
Ghostrunner 2 sees you once again as Jack, seemingly alive after the events of the first one. You're reanimated and working with the climbers once again. He's not quite as moody and edgy as he was before, but he's still a man of few words and many soul slashes. After the events of the first game, there's no Mara and no Architect, has led to a power vacuum within the tower. You're once again assisting the climbers, trying to establish some semblance of order among the chaos. Following this, two groups rise up to pose a threat to the tower. The Asura, a powerful AI-focused cult, and the Hammers, a new organised faction full of deserters and outcasts from the tower, now led by their leader Mitra. Therein lies my issue with the game. I've read out the plot to you and I still have no clue what I'm talking about. Especially in its early stages, there is too much at once. Following an attack by one group, you then don't acknowledge them in the next mission when you focus on someone else, and so on. It just feels a little disjointed in its delivery. Whereas the first game, while limited in its approach, granted, naturally started small and unfolded into a wider range in story and themes, it was handled well. Here it's all a bit spinning plates, like there's something here, then there, then something here, then over there. It just doesn't quite hit like they were going for me personally. Another factor in this is the writing, which while mostly in keeping with the game's minimalist punchy approach, still finds time for quips and out-of-place dialogue that just doesn't click. The bad guys talking about things with such dramatic repercussions early doors just falls a bit flat. It puts all its eggs in its basket early, but the eggs are a little cracked, and you can't tell which yolk is from which egg.
Let's go.
This all sounds wholly negative, and it's probably not as bad as I'm making out. My main point here is comparison. I just much prefer the narrow, streamlined story in 1 than I do the expansive attempts in 2. But I don't discourage the developers for trying, it's appreciated that they did try. The story, however, is a byproduct for what this game does exceptionally well, once again, and that's its gameplay. Cue the montage.
Unpleasant.
Ghostrunner 2 wastes precisely none of your time from loading to get right back to feeling like an unstoppable, well, in my case, very stoppable, parkour metal ninja man. Not necessarily a guarantee that it would be just as good, so the developers, once again, have nailed, emphasis on nailed, the gameplay. It deploys a lot of the same level design early on that you encountered at the end of the first game, ensuring that feeling of being your peak ability right from the beginning. You intuitively know how to handle its obstacles because whatever it throws at you, you have the foundations to deal with and have dealt with before. The fundamentals here remain the same. You slide, dash, and jump across increasingly elaborate and handcrafted levels, all the while dealing with free running obstacles and a huge amount of enemy types to combat in crafted arenas. Returning, of course, is the staple of the game, the sensory boost ability, largely unchanged from before because you can't improve upon perfection. Ghostrunner 2 does, however, make some tweaks right from the off that come as a welcome improvement and a surprise. Firstly, you now have a dash and a stamina meter, allowing for more options in parkour and combat, as well as the ability to block enemy attacks from the start this time. Block too much, however, and you run out of guard and are vulnerable to an attack until you recover. It's a nice option that feels in keeping with the game's style. Runs and attacks are no longer over when out of position to a gunshot. It still requires a bit of thought, so it's not a guaranteed cheat sheet. Both of these allow for even more moment-to-moment control and movement combinations to play with, giving you even more options to tackle its combat arenas. Everything here remains as it was. That's to say, perfect. Freely run and jump across its various arenas with no second thought. Operating at speed seemingly impossible, but very doable because of how reactive and swift the game feels. It would have been easy to do too much and ruin this feeling, so it has to be commended that the game, along with its predecessor, stands near alone in making you feel the way they do. Not to harp on again, but this does bring me back to the mini-hub areas again. For me, Ghostrunner as a whole, as a brand, is at its best when it's seat of your balls fast and on-the-fly thinking. Ghostrunner 1 handled pacing by having the start of some levels be a bit slower and more platformy to build you into the level again, like a roller coaster with multiple drops. While the missions in Ghostrunner 2 tend to start fast and stay that way, it's the moments in between these missions in the hub section that only serve to artificially slow the game down. I want infinite enemies and free running directly injected into my veins. I don't want to come down off this high, and yet the game forces you to sometimes. Another addition to the highs of this game and the movement is the motorcycle.
It's,
Bike.
wow.
You use the bike in certain sections, and while admittedly it can feel a bit janky and clumsy at times, let's face it, a bike is never going to be as responsive as the player, and this bike leads to certain design decisions I don't necessarily agree with, such as the open level design in certain areas. It is overall a neat addition, and when it clicks, it does feel like a natural progression from the first game. The first time you use it, for example, is a real highlight of the overall game, and again later on during the boss level. It has its flaws, but it just about works. It's a nice addition to the overall game.
Zoe,
Yeah?
I won't be back today.
Another follow-on is the instant restart button. Ghostrunner 2 maintains the one more run feeling from the first. You die in one hit still, but so do your enemies. The feeling of making every movement matter continues just as they left it from the first game. Instant respawns once again allow the player to not dwell on their mistakes by letting them getting hit once, instead changing on the fly, going left this time instead of right. This dynamic problem solving is so baked into Ghostrunner that it's hard to imagine the game without this, and once again, I'm glad it returned untouched. Well, mostly. Whoever's decision it was to move the instant reset button from triangle to X, this annoys me so much for no reason. I hope you burn. To complement this untouchable gameplay is two very key things. First of all, in my opinion, the biggest improvement and refinement over the original game is enemy design and application in its areas. Whereas the first one drip-fed you enemy types and numbers, Ghostrunner 2 trusts the player more and says, fuck it, here's 4 to 5 enemy types, early on, and more of them, more often. Instead of rooms or 3 to 4, you frequently encounter double-digit arenas in large-scale environments. But it's never overwhelming, mainly because of the speed of the game, you don't have time to stop and assess just how out of your depth you might be. It's too late for that because you've already killed 4, and there's 7 more who need to be killed before you can progress. The added enemies here all have direct counters that the player possesses, such as melee, sensory boost and other abilities. It's an excellent mixture of enemy types, both brand new ones just for this game, and returning ones from the first game. None of this would work if the level design wasn't up to the level needed. Imagine Ghostrunner 1 but with way more enemies in each arena. It would feel way too congested and claustrophobic. Ghostrunner 2 seems to relish its attempts to step up from the original. Large, grandiose arenas that yet somehow feel small and engaging. You're still able to navigate this sandbox in many ways and take out its enemies how you choose. Just now there is more variety, more of them, and more ways to do it. It manages to do this without sacrificing the speed and momentum the game thrives upon. There are times when it doesn't quite work, however, the developers somewhat overreaching in their scope and level design suffers for it. It becomes less about navigation, more so trial and error, and that's the fine line the game normally treads well enough, but sections of the game, such as areas outside the tower, don't quite hit the same as they do inside. I don't want to travel the map, I want to conquer it. Watch as I mould its walls and levels to my will, not go to this objective marker. A perfect example of the level design from Ghostrunner 1 to Ghostrunner 2 is an early Zybervoid section, which feels right out of the first game's punishing finale. Dodging attacks while free running at pace, this section is no holds barred, and as a Ghostrunner 1 veteran, even I was like, Jesus Christ, give me a minute. It's fast and linear, and it works so well, especially when you compare it to the first game and what this game reaches for.
Stay alive. Sweet Jesus.
Abilities and upgrades once again return to aid you in your quest to separate men from their limbs which hold them back. Abilities such as Blink and Tempest return, and the developers must have heard my typo in the last video where I said shurikens were an ability. In this one they are. Blink especially has received a visual upgrade. These upgrades now are deployed via a new and improved upgrade system. The Tetris block system of before is gone and replaced by the motherboard system. Upgrades and abilities are located within chips. Abilities and perks you can purchase using the game's version of currency. You gain more for chaining kills and combos in quick succession and for finding collectibles. so you spend them in the main hub area or at terminals throughout the map. The chips are divided into subsections, such as travel, flow, and sword, and can only be placed with a chip of the same subsection in the upgrade tree on the motherboard. You can upgrade this as you go to unlock more slots to use, however there are 8 sections and only 5 lines, so something has to miss out. These upgrades also have passive bonuses you can get by arranging the chips in certain orders, such as this upgrade only applies if you have this in the last slot in the tree. It still requires some thinking, and does help the feeling of not missing out as much as the Tetris-style system from the first game had. It was something that doesn't necessarily need changing, but it's a welcome addition and works well in complementing the game's other systems, maybe more so than the first by allowing far more upgrades than before, so it was a nice touch. Accenting all this, the movement, the kills, the story, everything as before, is the sauce that turns this game from delicious to downright filthy. It's the dirty soundtrack. Roll the clips.
Be able to join you.
I'm going in.
As with the first game, it's nothing outright spectacular, but you've noticed if it wasn't this good, and it would certainly affect the overall experience, so it's worth mentioning how much it slaps you about your metal ninja face. Levels seem to have their own certain theme tunes and music style as well, giving them more identity and making them more memorable for the player. Ghostrunner 2 also brings with it some additional little in-game modes, such as in certain levels there will be a terminal you can activate, where this activates a challenge mode for an arena that you've just completed, such as a parkour challenge or a killing challenge. Doing this will give you currency the faster you complete it. Another of these modes is the Rogue Runner mode, a mode that opens up more levels and rewards as you progress in the story. It's marketed in-game as training exercises. These take place in the Cyber Void space, which only serve to highlight how bad those sections were from the first game. These sections are tailor-made to be tackled in certain ways. There are 5 stages to the mode, with different levels unlocking as you progress through the story. This mode has you completing nodes to earn abilities and upgrades that roll into the next node, and so on until you finish the overall stage. These nodes come in the form of either parkour or kill enemy arenas. It's a fun little mode that serves to test the player and offers a nice distraction from the main story content.
Stage 1 complete.
So in the words of a giant purple monster, and no, I'm not talking about Banana, perhaps I treated you too harshly. While upon replaying the game I found my initial complaints not as bad as I first thought, there are some things I didn't like that do remain the same. However, it's certainly a worthy sequel that's let down in places by overreaching during its ambition, but it's still a solid game that is capable of generating a feeling most games cannot. Think less improvements and more refinement to an already stunning mode. Ghostrunner 2 is, as it turns out after all what I thought it wasn't, a worthy sequel to the groundbreaking first game. It would have been harder to fail given such strong foundations from the first one, but nevertheless, despite my complaints with it, the game from beginning to end does what it needed to again. Make you feel like the Ghostrunner.